Anytime you give a speech in a debate round, it's important that you deliver the speech using strong communication skills. Your goal is to communicate your arguments effectively without being distracting or difficult to understand. To come off as convincing as possible, you need to keep in mind the following characteristics of good delivery: stance, gestures, eye contact, inflection, and volume. In the next several clips, you will see some specific do's and don'ts for each characteristic that you will want to keep in mind when you deliver your speeches. Let's first take a look at some examples of stance.
The U.S. economy is on a short-term rebound due to a strong dollar and Trump policies, but the economy is still fragile. According to Weizmann in 6/13/2017. The Federal Reserve is set to raise short-term interest rates. A vote of confidence in the American economy expanded for 9 straight months, or United States factors have expanded for 9 straight months, rebounding from a slump caused by cuts in the energy industry and by a strong dollar. The U.S. market is surging by stronger corporate profits, brightening economic forecasts, and hopes that Donald Trump and the Republican Congress will cut taxes and regulations. The Fed may be ratcheting up rates partly to take a little air out of the potential bubble in stock prices before it bursts. The Trump administration insists it can lift growth by about 3% a year by cutting taxes.
Notice that Mr. King began his speech by leaning over the podium. He then had his legs crossed. He shifted his weight back and forth, and lastly, he held his computer in front of his face. These movements and stances can be quite distracting. Now let's take a look at an example of some proper ways to stand.
The U.S. economy is on a short-term rebound due to a strong dollar and Trump policies, but the economy is still fragile.
Notice how Mr. King's posture is professional yet comfortable. His legs are shoulder-width apart, and he is standing still the entire time. His hands are simply down by his side, except for simple gestures every once in a while. This brings me to gestures. Any movement you make is important and should be purposeful. Try to avoid any pointless movements. Watch this example of gestures you do not want to use.
The U.S. economy is on short-term rebound due to strong dollar and Trump policies, but the economy is still fragile. The Federal Reserve is set to raise short-term interest rates, a vote of confidence in the American economy. The United States factories have expanded for 9 straight months, rebounding from a slump caused by cuts in the energy industry and by a strong dollar. The stock market is surging on stronger corporate profits, brightening economic forecasts, and hoping that President Trump and the Republican Congress will cut taxes.
As you can see, Mr. King was doing several things that were distracting. He held his hand in his pocket, which is a definite no-no. He also made a repetitive gesture while speaking, which is very distracting to the judge. When speaking, be sure you're not fidgeting. Any distracting movements will take away from what you want the judge to hear. It's also important to maintain a variety of movements. In the next video, you will see that Mr. King uses gestures correctly.
The U.S. economy is on a short-term rebound due to strong dollar and Trump policies, but the economy is still fragile.
You should have noticed that in this video, Mr. King's hands were by his side, and each movement that he made was purposeful and not over the top. Another important characteristic of delivery is eye contact. Take a look at this example.
The Federal Reserve is set to raise short-term interest rates, a vote of confidence in the American economy.
In the clip, you might have noticed that Mr. King was only looking up for brief moments. This created a constant head motion that could be very distracting to a judge. Let's take a look at a better use of eye contact.
The U.S. economy is on a short-term rebound due to a strong dollar and Trump policies, but the economy is still fragile.
We saw how Mr. King looked at the judge for full thoughts and phrases, not just one word. Inflection is also important as you deliver your speeches. The goal is to avoid boring the judge and to appear knowledgeable on the topic. Watch how Mr. King uses inflection.
The Federal Reserve is set to raise short-term interest rates, a vote of confidence in the American government. United States factories have expanded for 9 straight months, rebounding from a slump caused by cuts in the energy industry and by a strong dollar.
We just saw 2 examples of how not to use inflection. First, Mr. King was monotone and included very little inflection. This will bore your judge. Next, Mr. King went to the opposite end of the spectrum and over-inflected. Just remember, if you become too passionate, you could lose your credibility and your ethos would be lost. Now, watch an example of how inflection should be used.
The U.S. economy is on a short-term rebound due to strong dollar and Trump policies, but the economy is still fragile.
Mr. King made sure to speak with inflection, but was not too passionate. He enunciated his words and delivered his message with just enough enthusiasm. Lastly, we're going to discuss volume. You want to project your voice so that the judge hears you clearly, but you don't want to scream or yell. Keep in mind the size of the room. Let's watch a video.
The Federal Reserve is set to raise short-term interest rates, a vote of confidence in the American economy. United States factories have expanded for 9 straight months, rebounding from a slump caused by cuts in the energy industry and by a strong dollar.
In the next video, Mr. King will show us how volume can be used appropriately for a debate round.
The U.S. economy is on a short-term rebound due to strong dollar and Trump policies, but the economy is still fragile.
Notice how Mr. King was easily heard, but not too soft or too loud. So now we've seen both good and bad examples of stance, gesture, eye contact, inflection, and volume. If you keep all these tips in mind when you deliver your speech, you should have a successful debate round.